What if I told you that a young man born into a rich and powerful family would give up a comfortable life to spend his days asking difficult questions? A man who watched his beloved teacher being sentenced to death would go on to become one of the greatest philosophers in human history. His ideas about justice, knowledge, and education would influence the world for more than 2,000 years. Even today, students in schools and universities still study his teachings. How did an ordinary young man become one of the greatest thinkers of all time? This is the unbelievable and inspiring story of Plato, the philosopher who taught the world to search for truth. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Universal English. Today, we bring you an inspiring story of wisdom, courage, and the search for knowledge. It is the story of a man who devoted his entire life to understanding the deepest questions of human existence. His name was Plato. Even after more than 2,000 years, people still read his books, discuss his ideas, and admire his wisdom. But his journey to greatness was not easy. He lived during a time of war and political conflict, witnessed injustice, and lost the teacher he loved and respected the most. Yet he never stopped searching for truth. This is the unbelievable and inspiring story of Plato, the man who changed philosophy forever. So sit back, relax, and travel back to ancient Greece as we discover how one man became one of history's greatest thinkers. A child of Athens. Our story begins around the year 428 BC. In the great city of Athens, Greece, a baby boy was born into a wealthy and noble family. His name was Plato. His real name may actually have been Aristocles, but people later called him Plato, a name that possibly meant broad because of his wide shoulders. Plato grew up in a family of influence and privilege. Many members of his family were involved in politics. As a child, he received an excellent education. He studied literature, poetry, music, and physical training. Everything suggested that he would one day become an important political leader. But fate had something entirely different planned for him. The curious young man. From an early age, Plato loved asking questions. He was not satisfied with simple answers. He wanted to understand life itself. What is justice? What makes a person good? Why do people suffer? What is the purpose of life? Unlike many young men, Plato enjoyed long conversations about ideas. He loved learning and thinking deeply. His curiosity would eventually lead him to a man who would completely change his life. That man was named Socrates. Meeting the great teacher. One day, Plato met the famous philosopher Socrates. Socrates was unlike anyone Plato had ever known. He did not write books. He did not claim to know all the answers. Instead, he asked questions. Question after question. He challenged people to think for themselves. Plato was fascinated. He became one of Socrates' closest students. The two spent many years discussing philosophy, justice, truth, and human nature. For Plato, meeting Socrates was one of the most important moments of his life. The young man who might have become a politician was now becoming a philosopher. Lessons from Socrates. Socrates taught Plato something very important. He taught him that wisdom begins by admitting that we do not know everything. This idea changed Plato's life. Instead of trying to appear intelligent, Plato focused on learning. He listened carefully. He asked questions. He thought deeply. Socrates also taught him to seek truth even when it was difficult or unpopular. These lessons would remain with Plato forever. A city in trouble. During Plato's youth, Athens was going through difficult times. The city had been weakened by wars and political conflicts. Leaders disagreed with one another. The government changed many times. People argued about how society should be organized. Plato watched these events carefully. He became disappointed with politics. Many leaders seemed more interested in power than in justice. These experiences made him wonder, what would an ideal society look like? Who should govern? How can people create a just and fair world? These questions would later inspire some of his greatest works. The death of Socrates. Then tragedy struck. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the traditional beliefs of Athens. He was put on trial. Plato and many other students were shocked. How could such a wise and honest man be treated like a criminal? The court found Socrates guilty. He was sentenced to death. Plato was heartbroken. His beloved teacher was forced to drink poison and died. The event changed Plato forever. He lost not only his teacher but also his faith in many political leaders. He realized that even a wise and innocent man could become a victim of injustice. The death of Socrates inspired Plato to dedicate his entire life to philosophy and the search for truth. The young man from Athens had lost his teacher but found his purpose. The death of Socrates convinced him that knowledge, wisdom, and justice were more important than power and wealth. But his greatest adventures were still ahead, leaving Athens behind. After the death of his beloved teacher Socrates, Plato was devastated. Athens no longer felt like home. Every street reminded him of his teacher and the injustice that had taken place. He feared that he too might face danger because of his close relationship with Socrates. So Plato made a difficult decision. He left Athens. The young philosopher began traveling to different parts of the Greek world. These journeys changed his life. He visited many cities and met scholars, mathematicians, and political leaders. Everywhere he went, he learned something new. For Plato, education never ended. The world itself had become his classroom. The search for wisdom. During his travels, Plato spent time in Egypt. The Egyptians were famous for their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. Plato was amazed by their ancient traditions and wisdom. He listened carefully and learned as much as he could. Then he traveled to southern Italy. There he met philosophers who believed that mathematics could explain the universe. These ideas fascinated him. He began to think deeply about numbers, logic, and the hidden order of nature. The more he traveled, the more he realized that wisdom could be found in many places. Every new experience expanded his understanding of the world. The dream of the perfect society. As Plato continued his journeys, one question remained in his mind. Why do societies become unjust? He had seen corruption and political conflict in Athens. He had watched innocent people suffer. Most importantly, he had seen Socrates die because of an unfair decision. Plato believed that governments failed because leaders often lacked wisdom. He began imagining a different kind of society. What if the wisest people became leaders? What if rulers cared more about justice than power? What if education prepared people to become good citizens? These questions would eventually inspire his greatest work. A dangerous adventure in Sicily. Plato's travels eventually brought him to the island of Sicily. There he met a ruler named Dionysius I. At first, Plato hoped he could teach the ruler about justice and good government. But the ruler did not like criticism. Plato's ideas made him uncomfortable. The relationship between the two men quickly became difficult. According to ancient stories, Plato's situation became so dangerous that he was eventually forced to leave Sicily. Some accounts even say that he was briefly sold into slavery. Fortunately, friends helped him regain his freedom. It was a shocking experience. A man who would later become one of history's greatest philosophers had once lost his freedom. Yet even this hardship did not destroy his spirit. Instead, it made him even more determined to teach people about wisdom and justice. Returning to Athens. After years of traveling, Plato finally returned to Athens. He was no longer the young student who had followed Socrates through the streets. He had become an experienced thinker with new ideas and a greater understanding of the world. Now he had a dream. He wanted to create a place where people could study, think, and search for truth together. He wanted to build a school unlike any the world had ever seen. That dream would soon become reality, the birth of the Academy. Around 387 BC, Plato founded a school called the Academy. It was located in a peaceful area outside Athens. This school would become one of the most famous centers of learning in history. Students came from different places to study there. They learned mathematics, science, philosophy, politics, and ethics. Plato believed that education should not simply teach facts. It should teach people how to think. At the entrance to the academy, there was reportedly an important message. "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter." Plato believed that mathematics trained the mind to think clearly and logically. The academy became his life's greatest achievement. For nearly 40 years, Plato taught there and inspired countless students. Writing his great books, Plato also began writing his ideas. Unlike Socrates, who never wrote books, Plato carefully recorded his thoughts. Most of his writings were in the form of conversations called dialogues. In these dialogues, Socrates often appeared as the main character. Through these writings, Plato explored many important questions. What is justice? What is love? What is knowledge? What makes a good person? His books became some of the most influential works in human history. Even today, people around the world continue reading them. The Republic? One of Plato's most famous books was The Republic. In this book, he described his vision of an ideal society. He believed that a nation would be happiest if it were led by wise and educated rulers. He called these rulers philosopher kings. According to Plato, the best leaders are not those who seek power. The best leaders are those who seek wisdom and justice. This idea was revolutionary. Even after more than 2,000 years, people still discuss and debate Plato's ideas about government and leadership. The allegory of the cave. Another famous idea from Plato is the allegory of the cave. In this story, people spend their entire lives inside a dark cave, seeing only shadows on the wall. They believe those shadows are reality. But one person escapes and discovers the outside world. He sees the sun and understands the truth. When he returns to the cave and tries to explain what he has seen, the others refuse to believe him. This story teaches an important lesson. Many people are comfortable with ignorance. Learning and discovering the truth can be difficult. But wisdom requires us to move beyond the shadows and seek understanding. A famous student arrives. One day, a young man arrived at Plato's academy. His name was Aristotle. He was intelligent, curious, and eager to learn. Plato quickly recognized his talent. The young student would remain at the academy for many years. Eventually, Aristotle himself would become one of the greatest philosophers in history. Through his students, Plato's ideas would continue to spread long after his death. The academy had become more than a school. It had become the birthplace of ideas that would shape human civilization. The student of Socrates had become a great teacher himself. He had traveled the world, survived hardship, written extraordinary books, and founded one of history's first great schools. The teacher of a generation. By now, Plato had become one of the most respected men in all of Greece. His academy was famous. Students traveled from distant cities just to study under him. Some wanted to become philosophers. Others wanted to become leaders. Plato welcomed anyone who had a desire to learn. He spent his days teaching, discussing ideas, and writing books. For him, education was not simply about gaining knowledge. It was about becoming a better person. He believed that wisdom could improve both individuals and society. As the years passed, his reputation continued to grow. People began calling him one of the wisest men in Greece. Yet Plato remained humble. He still considered himself a student of truth, a lifelong search for answers. Even in old age, Plato never stopped asking questions. He continued writing and thinking deeply about life. What is happiness? What is justice? What happens after death? Can human beings ever create a perfect society? These questions fascinated him until the end of his life. Unlike many people, Plato believed that learning never ends. No matter how much knowledge a person has, there is always more to discover. This attitude made him one of the greatest thinkers in history. He showed the world that wisdom comes from curiosity and a willingness to keep learning. The power of ideas. Plato understood something very important. Ideas are powerful. A great idea can survive for centuries. A great idea can change the world. This is why he spent so much time writing. He wanted future generations to continue thinking about the questions that mattered most. He knew that one day he would die. But he also knew that his ideas could live forever. And he was right. More than 2,000 years later, people still read his books and discuss his philosophy. Very few people in history have left such a lasting influence. The Academy continues to grow. The Academy became much more than a school. It became a community of thinkers. Students spent years studying mathematics, science, politics, and philosophy. They discussed difficult questions and challenged one another's ideas. Plato encouraged debate. He believed that people learn by asking questions and seeking truth together. The Academy continued operating for centuries after Plato's death. Its influence spread throughout the ancient world. Many of the ideas that shaped Western education began there. In many ways, Plato helped create the idea of the university itself. Plato's final years. As Plato grew older, his body became weaker, but his mind remained active and curious. He continued teaching and writing almost until the end of his life. His students admired him deeply. To them, he was more than a teacher. He was a guide and an inspiration. They respected his wisdom and kindness. Plato had dedicated his entire life to learning and teaching. He had never become a king or a military hero. Yet his influence was greater than that of many rulers. He had changed the way people thought about knowledge, education, and justice. The death of Plato. Around 348 BC, Plato passed away at the age of about 80 years old. Different stories exist about his final moments. Some ancient writers said that he died peacefully in his sleep. Others said that he died while attending a wedding celebration. No one knows the exact truth, but everyone agreed on one thing. The world had lost one of its greatest minds. His students mourned the death of their beloved teacher. The Academy continued, but it would never be the same without him. The philosopher who had spent his life searching for truth was gone. Yet his ideas were only beginning their journey. A legacy that changed the world. After Plato's death, his writings spread throughout the ancient world. Generations of philosophers studied his ideas. Scientists, political leaders, and teachers learned from his books. Even famous thinkers who disagreed with him still respected his work. His student, Aristotle, would go on to become one of history's greatest philosophers. And through Aristotle, Plato's influence would reach countless others. For more than 2,000 years, his ideas have shaped philosophy, education, politics, and science. Very few people have influenced human thought as deeply as Plato. Why Plato still matters today. Why do people still study Plato after so many centuries? Because the questions he asked are still important. What is justice? What is truth? What makes a good leader? How should society be organized? What is the purpose of education? These questions remain just as meaningful today as they were in ancient Greece. Plato teaches us to think deeply and question our assumptions. He reminds us that wisdom is not simply knowing facts. True wisdom comes from understanding ourselves and the world around us. Lessons from Plato's life. What can we learn from Plato? First, never stop asking questions. Curiosity is the beginning of wisdom. Second, education is one of the most powerful forces in the world. Knowledge can transform both individuals and societies. Third, truth is worth seeking, even when the journey is difficult. And finally, ideas matter. A single idea can inspire generations and change the course of history. Plato's life proves that a person does not need wealth or military power to leave a lasting legacy. Sometimes, the greatest power comes from thinking deeply and sharing wisdom with others. Thank you for watching this inspiring biography on Universal English. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop searching for wisdom. See you in the next inspiring biography.